Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Nice to see you again. I'm Dustin Cormier. This is How to Rock Astrology. We are continue our reading of Chapter 1 of Pluto, the Evolutionary Journey of the Soul. We just did a little bit of the intro of Chapter 1. Now we are going to read this next long section about Pluto's house, sign, and polarity point. Jeffrey Wolf Green continues. Pluto's house and sign placement describe two simultaneous phenomena. On the one hand, the natal position of Pluto describes the general vibration that a person comes in with, as well as the specific individualized patterns in identity association implied from the evolutionary past, the desires, beliefs, thoughts, perceptions, values, and orientation to reality itself. On the other hand, the natal position of Pluto points to the evolutionary desire, intent, or cause of this life as seen in Pluto's opposite house and sign. Whether the individual is conscious of this intent or not does not matter, because the soul, not the personality, is the ultimate causal factor or determining force behind each life. The lesson will occur in some way through evolutionary necessity. If we are conscious of the intent for this life, we can foster it through cooperation and non-resistance. As the life unfolds, the inherent patterns of identity association seen in the natal position of Pluto. Sorry, folks. Mom.
Yeah.
I'm live on YouTube right now. Can I call you back?
Can I ask you a real quick question?
Okay.
If someone puts a cable on the third fret, where do I play? Same?
Where? For what chord?
Bass.
Uh,
Bass playing stay the same?
no, you bring every note up. Every chord you got to bring up 3 frets.
Oh, even on the bass.
Yes. Well, yeah. So if they do a D chord, like you've got to play an F.
Oh my God. Okay, bye.
Okay, later. It's my mom. Sorry about that, folks. Okay. So, Jeffrey Wolf says that the soul, not the personality, is the ultimate causal factor or determining force behind each life. The lesson will occur in some way through evolutionary necessity. If we are conscious of the intent for this life, we can foster it through cooperation and non-resistance. As the life unfolds, the inherent patterns of identity association seen in the natal position of Pluto will be reborn to a new level of expression described by Pluto's opposite house and sign. Right. The implied limitations of the past will be experienced in some way, so that the evolutionary point will transmute these limitations into new levels or horizons of awareness and expression. Okay, sorry. I want to just have a breathing moment because that phone call, kind of divided my mind a little bit there. A big emphasis here is on the dual phenomena which is being described with Pluto. One being the generational vibration that one comes in with, and the other being the evolutionary desire, intent, and cause of this life, as seen in Pluto's opposite house and sign. The limitations of the past will be experienced in some way, so that the evolutionary point will transmute these limitations into new levels or horizons of awareness and expression. Okay, now we'll go on. When we link these principles to the coexisting desires inherent in the soul, we will see that there is an implied tension between the past, present, and future. The potential for internal conflict is enormous. The desire for separateness can lead to an effort to maintain the past, while the desire for return to the source promotes a focusing on the future, the polarity point of Pluto. The tension or conflict, if there is subconscious resistance, occurs in each moment of our lives. An implied tension between the past, present, and future. So Jeffrey Wolf goes on. When you arrive or emerge into physical life. Oh, I see why. Okay. So, the following quote comes from Notes from Seth Speaks, Metaphysics of Counseling, Autumn 1977, page 40. So this is from that channeled character of Seth, if you've ever heard of them. Jeffrey Wolf quotes Seth here. When you arrive or emerge into physical life, not only is your mind not a blank slate waiting for the scrolls that experience will write upon it, but you are already equipped with a memory bank far surpassing that of any computer. You face your first day upon the planet with skills and abilities already built in, though they may not be used. And they are not merely the result of heredity as you think it. You may think of the soul or entity as some conscious and living, divinely inspired computer who programs its own existences and lifetimes. But this computer is so highly endowed with creativity that each of the various personalities it programs, in turn, creates realities that may have been undreamed of by the computer itself. Wow, that's incredible. Each such personality is highly tailored to meet very specialized environments. It has full freedom, but it must operate within the context of existence which it has programmed. Within the personality, however, is the condensed knowledge that resides in the computer as a whole. Each personality has within it the ability to not only gain a type of existence in the environment, in your case in the physical reality, but to add creatively to the very quality of its own consciousness, and in so doing, to work its way through the specialized system, breaking the barriers of reality as we know it. Again, that's Notes from Seth Speaks, Metaphysics of Counseling, Autumn 1977, page 40. Some psychedelic stuff. Each personality has within it the ability to not only gain a type of existence in the environment, in your case in the physical reality, but to add creatively to the very quality of its own consciousness, and in so doing, to work its way through the specialized system, breaking the barriers of reality as it knows it. It's karma dissolving its own karma. So, from that quotation, Jeffrey Wolf goes on. Let's check for comments here. Some simple examples will illustrate these principles. The sign that Pluto is in, for example, Pluto in Leo, represents the generational vibration that we come in with. Pluto was in Leo from 1937 to 1958. Obviously, millions were born with Pluto in Leo. In general, this generation has natural desires and pre-existing orientations for creative self-actualization. Pluto in Leo individuals need enough freedom to actualize in a creative way their own unique purpose for living. This need implies a deep self-orientation, a more or less narcissistic orientation to life. Their own unique purpose for living. This need implies a deep self-orientation, a more or less narcissistic orientation to life. Okay. Pluto in Leo implies a creative generation that needs to be in charge of their own lives and able to take destiny by the hands and create it out of the strength of their own wills. Lots of people, that's very interesting. Lots of people born at that time made epic contributions to humanity. Led Zeppelin all has Pluto in Leo. That's me as a rock guy contributing to that conversation. Yet, the polarity sign for the generation is Aquarius. As a generation, then, they must realize Aquarian lessons that involve developing an awareness of the whole of humanity versus an awareness of just themselves. By developing this awareness, the generation could then creatively realize their specific purposes by linking their work or identities to the socially relevant needs of the whole. This process demands evolving an attitude of objectivity versus subjectivity, of detachment versus over-involvement with personal concerns. We are rapidly moving toward the Aquarian age. Is it only coincidence that the Pluto and Leo generation will progressively assume positions of social power in the next few decades? That's interesting. Looking back in the year 2020, it's hard to say whether that Pluto and Leo generation really did all that much positive Aquarian transmutation of the general energy, the generational energy. But still, in general, all Pluto and Leo people must learn Aquarian lessons. The specific house placements of Pluto will begin to indicate the specific and individualized lessons for each person. An example, Pluto in Leo in the 9th house. That would be for a Sagittarius rising. Likely. Let's say this person in a prior life desired to understand life in a cosmological, metaphysical, or religious context by intuitively sensing that there was more to reality than meets the tactile senses. Commonly, this individual, from a prior life point of view, needed to initiate a wide variety of experiences in order to discover or realize the knowledge that she or he was seeking. This need or desire became part of the individual's own creative self-actualization process from an evolutionary point of view. The individual would come into this life with not only a highly developed intuition, but also a rigid organization of realities, beliefs, that reflected the desire for self-understanding in a cosmological sense. The polarity point would be the 3rd house and the sign of Aquarius. Simply stated, the general Aquarian lessons mentioned above would be learned through 3rd house kinds of experiences. Thus, the individual would necessarily experience internal and external philosophical and intellectual confrontations, in order to realize the limitations of his or her own organization of reality, i.e., beliefs. This does not necessarily imply that those beliefs are wrong, but rather that they are limited. The individual would progressively learn that the paths to truth, which is the ninth house things, are relative, and thus learn to communicate in a variety of ways, depending on the people or circumstances encountered. Keep in mind how the two coexisting desires in the soul and the potential tension or conflict can impact on this illustrated process. Right. The different ways of taking on the responsibility for this kind of transformation. As an example, it would be very common for this individual coming into this life to defend the personal beliefs and the organization of reality relative to those beliefs. The individual commonly would attempt to convince or convert other people to his or her own point of view. The need to defend reflects the desire to maintain separateness. On the other hand, the desire to evolve or grow leads toward the intellectual or philosophical confrontation implied in the third house polarity. The philosophical confrontation implied in the third house of Aquarius. The interaction of these dual desires and the resulting behavior will be a primary theme underlying the individual's entire life. The potential for tension and conflict reflected in these dual desires of the soul can be equated with the basic psychological phenomenon of attraction and repulsion. We can be attracted to the very thing that we are repulsed by, or we can be repulsed by the very thing that we are attracted to. In the above example, where Pluto was in Leo in the ninth house, the soul intends or desires to evolve. This is demonstrated again by the polarity point, the natal position of Pluto, as the desire reflects itself. So this is actually, in the above example, we're talking about the being attracted to what we're repulsed by and repulsed by what we're attracted to. In this example, the soul intends or desires to evolve. This is demonstrated again by the polarity point of the natal position of Pluto. As this desire reflects itself through the consciousness of the individual, the ego, the individual is attracted to intellectual or philosophical discussions. Yet, this very attraction will guarantee, because of the implied limitations from the evolutionary past, intellectual or philosophical confrontations with other people. The individual will experience his or her own philosophical or intellectual limitations because of these confrontations, which will ignite the dynamic of repulsion through these experiences. In terms of behavior, the individual will alternately attempt to convince or convert others to their personal point of view, or withdraw altogether from this kind of experience to avoid dealing with this perceived and experienced conflict. Withdrawal creates an internal volcano of confrontation that induces intuitive thoughts or ideas that directly challenge the pre-existing beliefs or philosophical orientation that the individual brought into this life. Because the soul, Pluto, desires to evolve, the third house, it will lead the individual into Because the soul, i.e. Pluto, desires to evolve through the polarity point of that third house, it will lead the individual into conversations with others in order to effect the necessary challenges that allow for a transmutation of existing beliefs. In other words, the individual will subconsciously be attracted to, and thus draw to them, those kinds of people who have this effect upon his or her beliefs and philosophical orientation. As this process unfolds throughout life, the individual may come to realize the evolutionary lessons involved in Sorry, I'll say it again. As this process unfolds throughout life, the individual may come to realize the evolutionary lessons involved and acknowledge the relativity of his or her own point of view. At this point, they could participate in philosophical and intellectual discussions in a non-defensive way, learning from as well as teaching others. The individual would learn to understand and respect individual differences in beliefs, philosophies, religions, and intellectual organization. Conversely, the individual may succeed in repulsing the evolutionary pressure or intent. In this case, the behavior would manifest in defensiveness and rejection of anyone who did not agree with his or her own point of view. This attraction-repulsion dynamic, linked with the dual desires inherent in the soul, will manifest in any natal house position of Pluto. Allow yourself to take a few moments to reflect on your own natal position of Pluto, to see this principle operating in your own life. I'll just give you a moment to think about your own Pluto house and sign position, to reflect on this principle of attraction-repulsion. Are you attracted and yet also repulsed to the things relating to Pluto and its natal house and sign, and any planets that are also in either of those two houses and signs? Jeffrey Wolf goes on, from an ultimate point of view, repulsion will automatically be a consequence of any desire and attraction to anything other than to return to the source. Let's just read that over one more time. From an ultimate point of view, repulsion will automatically be a consequence of any desire and attraction to anything other than to return to the source. The return to the source is the first and final desire. Any separation is not as deep of a desire, and therefore there will always be a repulsion to it. But if we're karmically called to separate, to create boundaries for ourselves, to stake a claim in a piece of land, or a person, or a lover, or a territory, or a conquest of a goal, we have to separate all the things, sacrifice some things, sacrifice our own lover, sacrifice our own resources to make the climb towards that evolutionary need, the need that's more than the self, the need to go against the return to source and to go into the karmic retribution of the desire, in order to finally enjoy and really truly receive Pluto's originating point and the desire to return back to source after having gone away from it and that Plutonian impulse. From a purely psychological point of view, Pluto correlates to the deepest emotional security patterns in all of us. These security patterns are unconscious. most of us automatically gravitate to the path of least resistance. The patterns in identity association that are carried over from the evolutionary past are directly linked to the path of least resistance and, therefore, to our security needs at an unconscious level. The past represents familiarity and that which is known. Our lessons, or the evolutionary intent described by Pluto's polarity point, are not known. They are the unknown, the uncharted. The unknown, as described by our evolutionary intentions, directly challenges that which is known or familiar, and therefore challenges our security at the deepest possible level, the soul, our core. How many of us are aware of our security needs at an unconscious level? How many of us are aware of how these patterns and needs control or dictate our behavior? I think most of us would agree that many of us are not. If this is true, then how many clients are aware of these patterns? Again, not many, right? These deep-seated security needs drive us to approach certain areas in life in exactly the same way over and over again. These areas are specifically linked to the natal position of Pluto. If we remain stuck in the old way, the past, for security reasons, problems will arise in these areas because the soul in each of us desires to grow and evolve. The natal position of Pluto represents an area of natural gravitation for security reasons and is thus given tremendous power. Pluto implies a compelling force to maintain that area, that house and sign, in the familiar ways of operating, the past. This compelling force can be called compulsion or obsession if the resistance, the desire, is strong enough. The strength of the resistance determines the magnitude of problems or confrontations experienced in Pluto's natal house and sign position. Because the evolutionary force of the soul is to grow, the individual will either experience cataclysmic growth, i.e. evolution, because of the problems experienced through resistance to the evolutionary intent, or they will experience slow yet progressive growth because of the relative non-resistance to the evolutionary intent. These areas of natural gravitation will be the stumbling blocks to the individual's development and growth. The intense degree of power and identification of Pluto, the soul, is the cause of the problem. Because Pluto represents an essentially unconscious process, the individual is basically unaware of the motivational patterns of the soul and may feel stagnated, frustrated, or wonder why the same lessons, the same mistakes, the same kind of relationships, the same problems occur over and over again. Eventually, the person may ask the question, why am I here? What am I supposed to be doing? And what can I do about these things? These questions are a natural response to the desire for human identification with the Creator, although the individual may not recognize it as such. At this point, the astrologer can indicate ways to help the individual become freer and more growth-oriented. Once the person becomes aware of the problems, the motivations, needs, desires, attitudes, and security issues dictating his or her experiences. Then the necessary changes may occur if the individual desires to initiate them. Everything begins with desire. Again, the path to change rests in the polarity point of Pluto by house and sign. As change begins to occur, there will be an automatic redefinition, evolution, and re-expression in the natal house of Pluto. The individual will approach that area differently and will be reborn at a new level through death of the old behavioral patterns. We can take these ideas about Pluto and apply them to anyone. Through observing and listening to the client and analyzing the chart, we can determine the reality of that person as it exists for them. The ways in which we communicate or express these principles to another person are determined by the individual's level of understanding. It is extremely important to understand a person's evolutionary past. In the many years that I have been doing astrological charts, I've observed that 75 to 80% of any individual's behavior is directly conditioned by the past. Even modern psychologists refer to unconscious forces or memories that influence the thoughts, feelings, moods, and desires in our subjective consciousness. It is important to understand the past because it explains the here and now, why this kind of life, and for whatever reasons. It explains everything from the point of view It explains everything from the point of view of evolutionary necessity and karmic causes. Why this parent? Why this lover? This experience? Why these conditions in my life? And so forth. By understanding that we are in charge of that which we have been, are, and are in the process of becoming. Sorry, it's a little bit weird to get the grammar here right, but by knowing why this parent, why this lover, why this experience, why these conditions in this life, by understanding that, we are in charge of that which we have been, are, and are in the process of becoming. We have choices at every step and at every moment in our lives. The choices are reflected in our desires, and desire determines everything that occurs, individually and collectively. By understanding life in this way, we can more thoroughly understand the lessons that we must learn. We can understand the why of those lessons, and by so doing, we create a willingness to accept and not resist these lessons because of the knowledge gained about the past causes. If you are a student of astrology, these ideas can lead to the objective understanding of these issues in your own life. If you are an astrological counselor, then you may be able to use these ideas on your client's behalf. Cool. Why is it a common experience to have a difficult time during the first Saturn return? The first 28 to 30 years of life is spent living out the conditions represented by the evolutionary and karmic past. As the Saturn return approaches, the individual commonly begins to feel restricted, frustrated, or depressed by the reality or conditions of his or her life. The Saturn return is a natural growth period that is a condensed reflection upon the past and, therefore, accelerated because of the new evolutionary cycle that is in the process of emerging. As Saturn comes closer and closer to its natal position, the individual experiences two simultaneous states: a sense of restriction, frustration, and depression based on the old conditions, karmic heredity, but also the emerging instinctive sense of needing to redefine and recreate the life conditions. In other words, the past and future, the evolutionary intent of the soul, begins to collide in each moment of the individual's life. As the evolutionary forces converge upon the existing reality, the security that is defined in the past, Pluto, the individual is presented with extremely important choices that will determine the experiences of the next 28 years. Of course, there are other planetary cycles that influence this natural evolutionary process. Saturn has a natural 7-year cycle within the complete 28-year cycle. Jupiter also has a 12-year cycle of growth and expansion. The nodal axis of the moon has a natural 18-year cycle, and Uranus forms a square to itself at 21 years of age, an opposition between 39 and 42, and another square at 63. Finally returns at approximately 84 years. Neptune forms a square to itself at 42 years of age. Depending on its ecliptical path, Pluto can also form a square to itself during the life of an individual. During these natural cycles, the evolutionary forces relative to the future are accelerated relative to the conditions represented by the past. Those evolutionary forces represented by the past define the total reality of the moment, both individually and collectively. Creation is in a continual process of birth, death, and rebirth. We can observe this natural evolutionary process all around us, from the changing seasons to the solar system and universe beyond. So it should not be so surprising to consider that all of us are part of this process. To understand the past is to understand the moment. This understanding allows for positive choices relative to our individual and collective futures. We can help ourselves, and we can help humanity and the earth in doing so. It's like there's an old Chinese story about a tree which can only give of its fruit if it had nutriment and water and proper soil and good roots in its own energy field. That's how it can best give of the sacrifice of its fruits to those outside of itself. The natural cycles, Jeffrey Wolf goes on, the natural cycles of evolutionary acceleration allow for maximum growth opportunities. If those opportunities are resisted because of the cumulative forces of the past, then the potential for cataclysmic phenomena exists necessarily. Now that was kind of just talking a little bit about the philosophy of this nodal axis of Pluto, the metaphysics of it. What is it? What is it? Almost even the astronomy of it. What does it mean? So Jeffrey Wolf has kind of planed that out. Now we're going to go into further functional technical detail regarding Pluto and the function of its nodal axis. We're going to talk about that for a little bit, and then eventually we're going to get to Pluto in aspect to its nodal axis, and further things from there. This is all still continuing Chapter 1 of Pluto, The Evolutionary Journey of the Soul, Volume 1. So keep watching, folks. If you're watching live, I'm going to take a little bit of a break. I'm just going to go get a little bit of a snack anyway. Shouldn't be too long. I'm thinking 9:05. In about 5 minutes we'll come back, something like that. If not, shouldn't be more than 10 minutes. Although I know it can be bad for that. So I'll see you guys in about 5 minutes, folks. And we will continue reading, talking about Pluto.